It was late when I finally reached home. Work at the shop had kept me occupied, and by the time I arrived, it was already close to 10 p.m. I assumed my sister, Rishna, had gone to sleep by now, as she had a habit of sleeping early. She shared a room with our mother, and I didn't want to disturb either of them. Quietly, I changed my clothes, took my meal from the kitchen, and began eating in silence. As I ate, I suddenly heard my mother's voice. She couldn't speak properly due to a stroke that had left her partially paralyzed, and all she could produce were unintelligible sounds, groans and murmurs. At first I ignored it, thinking Rishna would take care of her, but the noises didn't stop. There was a sense of distress in them. I put down my plate and hurried to my mother's side, but what I saw froze me in shock. Rishna wasn't there. My mother looked restless, struggling for water. I quickly gave her some and then asked about Rishna. My mother, unable to form words, gestured with her frail hands, her eyes filled with urgency. And when I finally understood her message, a strange fear gripped my heart. Rishna had gone to the neighbors. A strange unease settled in my stomach. Why would she go there at this hour? The neighbor in question was a 35-year-old woman, hardly someone my 17-year-old sister should be visiting so late at night. The very idea seemed bizarre. Then a thought struck me. Earlier in the day, I had called Rishna and informed her that I might be late, possibly even past midnight. Maybe she had assumed I wouldn't be home at all and had sneaked out. But why? What kind of bond did she share with a woman nearly twice her age? The whole situation made no sense, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I put my mother to bed, ensuring she was comfortable, and then, instead of knocking at the neighbor's door like any rational person, I chose another route. I climbed up to the rooftop and made my way across, slipping into their house undetected. I needed to see for myself. The house was dark, eerily silent. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding. The closer I got, the more unsettling my thoughts became. A 35-year-old woman and a teenage girl. What could they possibly have in common? Why such a secretive relationship? And then just as I turned a corner, the sight that met my eyes sent a cold wave of horror crashing over me. Rishna wasn't with the woman. She was with her husband. And the scene before me was something I could neither process nor accept. My body tensed, my breath caught in my throat. The implications of what I was witnessing hit me like a storm. My sister, whom I had vowed to protect, was involved in something far beyond my understanding, something that shattered the fragile world I had been desperately holding together. I clenched my fist, my mind racing back to the brutal reality of our lives. We had nothing. Our father had passed away years ago, leaving us in a constant state of struggle. Our mother was bedridden, her body half useless from paralysis, and I, at just 17, had become the sole provider of our household. I had been working since I was 12, taking whatever job I could find to keep us afloat. But survival was cruel. What little I earned barely covered our mother's medication. There was no space for luxury, no room for dreams. Rishna, on the other hand, was growing up, becoming a young woman with desires and aspirations that I could never fulfill. She wanted new clothes, makeup, jewelry, simple things that other girls her age took for granted. And sometimes she would whisper to me in a voice heavy with unspoken sorrow, "Bhai, how long will we live like this? I want a better life." I would place my hand on her head and tell her, "One day things will change. One day everything will be okay." But in my heart, I knew I was lying. There was no way out for us, no education, no connections, no money to start a business. The weight of reality was suffocating. And now, standing here in this darkened house, watching my sister make choices I couldn't comprehend, a terrifying thought gripped me. Was this her way of escaping? A sense of helplessness overwhelmed me. My sister had chosen a path that I had never imagined for her, and I had no idea how to stop her. My hands trembled as I took a step back, my mind clouded with emotions I couldn't define. Anger, grief, guilt, all tangled into a suffocating knot inside me. I wanted to storm in, to shake her, to drag her back home and demand an explanation. But a part of me hesitated. Would she even listen? Had she already crossed a line from which there was no return? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay hidden. I needed to think. Bursting in blindly wouldn't change anything. If anything, it might only push her further away. I had to understand. I had to find a way to pull her out of this before it was too late. Silently, I turned and retraced my steps back to the rooftop, my heart heavy with the burden of a truth I wasn't prepared to face. A storm was coming, and I had no idea how to stop it. I would always reassure Rishna, telling her to stay hopeful, reminding her that her brother was here and everything would be all right. But nothing ever really changed. Life continued the same way, dragging on without relief. I turned 18 and Rishna was now 15. Even at such a young age, the burden of household responsibilities had fallen upon her shoulders. She spent her days buried in housework, exhaustion dulling her face. Seeing her so drained pained me deeply. I remembered how she had once been our father's little princess, his most cherished child. He would fulfill her every wish, never letting her desires go unheeded. And now, that same sister was crushed under the weight of our circumstances. But then, one evening, when I returned home from work, I saw something unusual. Rishna looked happy. Her face was glowing, and she even seemed to have made a little effort in her appearance. It wasn't something I had seen in a long time. It made me happy, but also it surprised me. I asked, "Rishna, is everything okay? Are you going somewhere? Or is someone coming over?" She smiled and replied, "Who would come to our poor house? No girl even befriends me because of our situation. But I did go somewhere today." Her words caught me off guard. I frowned and asked, "Where did you go? Mother is sick, and without telling me, you left the house? Why?" A strange worry settled in my heart. Rishna wasn't in the habit of leaving home, nor did she have permission to. She spent all her time with our mother. She was a simple girl, untouched by the world's ways, and I had always kept her away from its influence. So where had she suddenly gone today? She brought me a glass of cold water, sat beside me and said, "Brother, do you know we have new tenants next door? There's an auntie and her husband. They have no children. Their luggage arrived this morning. When I mentioned it to Mother, she suggested that we should check if they needed anything, as they are new in the neighborhood. So I went there and I dressed up a little so they would get a good impression of us." She was smiling as she spoke. "They are very nice people. Auntie is especially kind. She welcomed me warmly, made me sit in her house, and even offered me a drink. Their home is almost set up now. They don't need anything. They seem wealthy. They said they're only staying here temporarily because their house is being built. Once it's completed, they'll leave. They're building a mansion in a very big society." There was an unmistakable fascination in her voice, a longing. Listening to her, I felt uneasy. I sighed and said, "You shouldn't be so easily impressed by people. You don't know their real situation. They could be lying. You should be careful when going into a stranger's house. And honestly, Mother shouldn't have sent you there alone." Rishna shook her head and replied, "Why would Auntie lie? She even invited you to visit someday so she could show you her house. She even showed me a video of their mansion under construction on her phone. Her excitement was evident, but I didn't like where this was going. I spoke firmly. You don't need to go anywhere with them. They are strangers. And stop leaving the house without informing me. What if Mother needed something in your absence? She can't even call out for help. Only you and I understand her gestures." My voice was stern, and Rishna fell silent. After a pause, she nodded and said, "All right." Then she got up to serve dinner. After eating, I sat with Mother for a while. I was exhausted. As soon as I lay down, I fell into a deep sleep. But the next evening, when I returned from work, I saw something that made my heart sink. Rishna had dressed up again. A feeling of unease crept into me. I asked her where she had been. At first she hesitated, then she said, "The auntie next door sent a child to call me. I had no choice but to go. She needed help finding a nearby market. She was asking me about certain shops and places in the neighborhood." When I looked at Rishna's anxious and slightly fearful face, I didn't say anything to her. I felt that if I imposed too many restrictions on her, she might start resenting me. At such a young age, she not only had household responsibilities, but was also burdened by the difficulties of our life. Girls of her age spent their time playing with friends, enjoying carefree days, but she was already managing the stove and kitchen. If I had been too strict with her, she might have grown distant from me, so I chose to remain silent. And when I said nothing, a smile appeared on her face. Seeing her happy, even for a moment, made me feel relieved. She sat beside me and said, "Brother, if you allow, you should visit the neighbors sometimes. The auntie is truly a good woman. She treats me with so much love and I enjoy spending time there." I replied, "Fine, but make sure to ask Mother before going and only leave once you've finished all the household chores. Mother should not suffer in your absence." Rishna nodded eagerly. "Of course, brother. I will always finish my work before going. Actually, they have no children, so she feels very lonely. And since this is a new neighborhood for her, she hasn't adjusted yet." I remained quiet, listening to her words. I had given her permission, but something inside me was still uneasy. Our mother wasn't in a condition to keep an eye on her, and our father was no longer with us. That meant it was my responsibility to watch over Rishna. I decided I would ask around about these neighbors. Maybe that would help me feel reassured. Coincidentally, the very next morning as I was leaving for work, I saw the 35-year-old woman standing by our door. She noticed me and smiled faintly. Gathering some courage, I greeted her, and she responded warmly. Then she asked, "You are Rishna's brother, aren't you?" I nodded. She continued, "Rishna is a wonderful girl. We've become very good friends. She has been such a great help to me. I knew nothing about this neighborhood, but she has guided me so well. You all seem like such good people." Her words put me slightly at ease. She seemed like an educated and well-mannered woman, and for the first time, I thought that perhaps it wasn't such a bad thing that my sister had found some joy in her company. After all, Rishna had been so burdened by our circumstances that I often feared she might fall into depression. If this friendship brought her happiness, then maybe it wasn't entirely wrong. But I had no idea that this would turn out to be the biggest mistake of my life. I had allowed my sister to go to strangers, my innocent sister, who had just stepped into the delicate phase of youth, who had never been exposed to the world's harsh realities, who had no idea about right or wrong. And now I had unknowingly given her permission to walk down a path that could lead to her destruction. Soon it became routine. Every evening, after finishing all the housework and giving Mother her medicine, Rishna would go to the neighbor's house. I had firmly told her that she wasn't allowed to go after sunset, and she obeyed that rule. She never went there after Maghrib, which reassured me. The neighbors had now been living there for quite some time, and nothing seemed unusual. But there was one noticeable change in Rishna. She had become happy, happier than I had seen her in years. She laughed more, smiled more. She had started dressing up frequently, leaving her hair open. At times I even caught her humming softly, lost in her own world. And then one day, something happened that shook me. She wore an expensive dress. I stared at her in surprise and asked, "Rishna, where did you get these clothes from?" Because I knew for a fact that she only had 4 outfits, the same old ones she had been wearing for the past 2 or 3 years. Some had patches stitched onto them, while others had faded in color. At first, Rishna looked nervous. Then she hesitated before saying, "Salma auntie gave them to me." Hearing this, I immediately tried to explain, "Why did you accept something like this from them? You didn't need to take anything. What will they think about us?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she said, "She brought them for me with so much love. How could I refuse? And I haven't worn anything nice in such a long time." She took a deep breath before continuing, "Auntie gave me 2 outfits as a gift. When I refused, she started getting upset, so I had no choice but to accept them." She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, and seeing her like that, I couldn't bring myself to say anything harsh. For her happiness, I let it go and said, "All right, but next time tell her not to give you such gifts. When my salary increases, I will buy new clothes for you myself." She simply shook her head and went back to doing the household chores. I watched her closely. She really did look beautiful in that new and expensive dress. After such a long time, she had worn something nice. Deep down, I wanted the same for her, to see her wearing good clothes, to see her happy. but I was helpless. My entire salary would go toward our mother's medicines, and whatever little remained was barely enough for household expenses. For now, I didn't say anything further, thinking that maybe this one time it wouldn't matter. But the next day, something even more shocking happened. I noticed small gold earrings sparkling in her ears. The way they shined made it clear that they weren't artificial. Frowning, I asked her in a stern voice, "Where did these earrings come from?" She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Oh, Salma Auntie gave them to me." I looked at her angrily and said, "Do you have any idea how expensive these are?" She laughed lightly and replied, "Oh, no. These aren't real gold. They just look like it. They're just imitation jewelry, really cheap ones. Auntie was wearing them, and I liked them, so she gave them to me." I wasn't convinced. "Did you refuse them?" She sighed. "I did. I even told her that my brother gets upset over things like this, but she laughed and said, 'If your brother has a problem, tell him to come and meet me.'" Her words made me uneasy. I looked at her with displeasure and said, "You need to stop going there every day and taking gifts from them. It's not right." I ignored it when it was just the clothes, but now this is too much. From now on, don't bring anything from them. Salma Auntie's unnecessary generosity didn't make sense to me. It felt unnatural. I shared my concerns with my friend, but he dismissed them. "You're overthinking this. She's a childless woman, and such women often try to fill that void by caring for other people's children. Maybe she sees her daughter in Rishna. And after all, Rishna is just 15 years old. Stop worrying so much." His words calmed me down a little. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overreacting. So I pushed my troubling thoughts aside and let things continue as they were. Days passed in this way. Then one night, there was a lot of work at the shop. Customers kept coming, and even after closing, we had to do the accounting and organize some supplies. The owner told us we'd be working late, so I called Rishna to let her know that I'd be home later than usual. But then unexpectedly, the owner decided to stop work halfway and told us we'd finish the rest tomorrow. So instead of midnight, I ended up leaving at 10 p.m. I thought to myself, Rishna must be asleep by now. Mother must be asleep too. There's no need to wake them up. Quietly, I washed my hands, ready to take out food for myself. I had just sat down to eat when I heard muffled sounds coming from my mother's room. At first, I ignored them, assuming that she probably needed water. Rishna would take care of it, I thought. Even in deep sleep, she would always wake up at the slightest sound from our mother. But then the sounds grew louder. Something was wrong. I rushed toward my mother's room, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Rishna's bed was empty. I called out for her, checked the washroom, but she was nowhere to be found. I quickly gave my mother some water and asked about Rishna. She gestured, indicating that Rishna had gone to the neighbor's house. My heart nearly stopped. I had forbidden her from going there after Maghrib. So what was she doing there at such a late hour? I was less of a brother to Rishna and more of a father. Ever since our father had passed away, I had raised her myself. I felt a deep responsibility for her, always thinking that I needed to get her married off as soon as possible so she could have a stable life. But now, when she was missing from the house in the middle of the night, my head felt like it would explode. I put my mother back to sleep, but I was anything but at peace. I didn't know whether I should go to Salma Auntie's house and bring Rishna back or wait for her return. After a moment of thought, I decided to take action. Silently, I climbed up the stairs, crossed the roof, and entered Salma Auntie's house the same way I had done before. I needed to find out what was really going on between Rishna and Salma Auntie. Did she really see my sister as a daughter, or was there something else? The constant gifts, the unnecessary attention, and my sister's eagerness to run to her house every day? None of it made sense. Salma Auntie had only been in the neighborhood for 2 months. She wasn't some long-time trusted neighbor. And a terrifying thought crept into my mind. Was my sister, in her innocence and desperation, getting involved in something terrible? Was she doing something wrong because of our financial struggles? Salma Auntie had showered her with luxuries, new clothes, gold earrings, small yet meaningful comforts, and my sister had been delighted by all of it. I prayed silently for her safety as I moved forward cautiously. To my shock, none of the doors were locked. The house was completely open. I made my way inside, carefully stepping forward until I reached the bedroom door. And then what I saw inside shook me to my core. Salma Auntie wasn't there. But my sister was. She was lying face down on the bed, her back bare. And Salma Auntie's husband was standing over her, bent towards her in a way that left no room for doubt. A deep, uncontrollable rage surged through me. I lost all control as I yelled, "Rishna, what are you doing here? Have you lost your mind?" At my voice, she bolted upright, hastily pulling her shirt back over her shoulders. Her face pale with shock. Fear filled her eyes, and she stammered, "Bhai, what are you doing here?" I stormed into the room, my hands shaking with fury. Without thinking, I grabbed Salma Auntie's husband by the collar and pulled him close, my grip tightening around his throat. "How dare you?" I growled, my voice shaking with fury. "How dare you take advantage of my innocent sister? Do you think you can buy her just because we are poor? I will kill you." I clenched my fists, ready to beat him until there was nothing left. My vision blurred with rage. I was about to squeeze the life out of him when suddenly Rishna screamed, "Bhai, stop! Please, for God's sake, stop! Do you even know who he is?" I turned my head sharply toward her. "I don't care who he is. He has no right to ruin your dignity like this. And where is Salma Auntie? Wasn't she the reason you kept coming here? Have you completely lost your mind, Rishna? Have you let their money and wealth blind you? Are you so disgusted with our poverty that you would stoop to this? Have you sold yourself for 2 new dresses? At least think about me. I gave up everything for you, and this is what you do?" My entire body trembled with anger, but what crushed me even more was the look on Rishna's face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sobbed uncontrollably. And then Salma Auntie entered the room. Seeing me, Salma Auntie spoke in a calm yet firm tone. "Afzal, how can you accuse your sister and my husband without knowing the full truth? Sit down and let us explain everything before you jump to conclusions." I was burning with rage. "I know women like you all too well. You have no children of your own, but you can't resist ruining the lives of others' daughters. Did you really think that by giving my sister expensive clothes and a few gifts, you could buy her dignity? My sister is not that cheap." I grabbed Rishna's hand and pulled her toward the door, determined to take her away from this house and these people. But Salma Auntie stepped in front of me, blocking our way. "You cannot hurl such filthy accusations at us," she said, standing firm. "Before you leave, listen to the full story and ask your sister what was really happening here." She forcefully made me sit down, turning to Rishna. "Tell your brother the truth first, then let him decide whatever he wants." I shot a furious glare at Salma Auntie and her husband, but then he finally spoke. "Your sister loves you deeply, Afzal. She would do anything for you. She understands your struggles even more than you do. That's why she hid her illness from you, an illness that has been causing her unbearable pain. She knew that medical treatment required money that you didn't have. So she chose to endure the suffering alone rather than burden you with it." His words sent a chill down my spine. I turned to look at Rishna. Her face was pale, her body fragile, her once lively features now dull and lifeless. Had she really been hiding something from me all this time? Salma Auntie's husband continued. "She has been suffering for over a year. When she first came to our house, I asked her why she looked so weak. That's when she told me about her pain. I felt my breath hitch. A year? My sister had been silently suffering for a whole year, and I had been too blind to notice. She has a severe abscess growing inside her back," he explained. "It's not visible from the outside, but inside it has been spreading like a wound that refuses to heal. The infection has been eating away at her body, which is why she has become so weak. It's not poverty that has drained her. It's the pain she has been enduring in silence. She never told you because she knew you couldn't afford treatment, and she didn't want to see you in more distress." I clenched my fists, my anger shifting into helplessness. "When I found out about this," he continued, "I told my husband. Maybe you don't know this, but my husband is a highly experienced surgeon." I turned to look at him again, my mind in a whirl. Salma Auntie took a deep breath. The moment he learned about Rishna's condition, he decided to help her. For the past few days, he has been giving her medicines to reduce the pain. That's why she has been feeling better lately. And now, since the medication has worked, it was finally time to remove the abscess. She paused, letting her words sink in. My heart pounded in my chest. She didn't want to go to a hospital, Salma Auntie explained. She was afraid. She begged me not to send her there, so my husband agreed to perform the procedure at home. That's what you walked in on, Afzal. He was not harming her. He was about to make an incision to drain the infected area. Her words hit me like a thunderbolt. I turned to Rishna, who was sobbing uncontrollably now. She whispered, "Bye. I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want to make things harder for you. You already do so much for us. I thought I could endure it. But the pain, it kept growing. I had no choice." Tears burned in my eyes. My hands, which had been ready to strangle a man moments ago, now trembled in guilt. I had been so blinded by my assumptions, so consumed by my fears, that I had failed to see the reality. My sister hadn't been corrupted. She hadn't been blinded by wealth. She had been suffering in silence, choosing to endure pain just so I wouldn't worry. I swallowed hard. Salma Auntie's husband, who I had just accused of the worst possible crime, looked at me with complete composure. "Afzal, you are a good brother, but sometimes love makes us blind. You were so focused on protecting her that you forgot to ask if she needed to be saved from something else, her own pain." I felt my entire world spin. I had almost committed a crime tonight. I had almost destroyed my sister's one chance at healing, and the worst part was I had failed her. During the day, Rishna never stayed here for long because she had to take care of our mother. But today, when you told her you'd be coming home late, she put our mother to sleep and came here, hoping to finally rid herself of this pain forever. But just at that moment, you arrived and misunderstood everything, twisting the truth into something it wasn't. "If you don't believe our words, then look at your sister's back yourself," Salma Auntie said. At her insistence, Rishna hesitated for a moment before turning her back toward me. What I saw made my blood run cold. A large, round, yellowish patch covered a portion of her lower back. It looked like it had festered inside, its infection spreading beneath the skin with no opening for relief. That was why an incision was necessary to clean the wound. That was why Salma Auntie's husband was preparing to perform the procedure when I had stormed in. I had accused them of the worst possible things, twisted every single one of their actions into something malicious, when in reality, they had been trying to help. Their intentions had been noble, but I had perceived their kindness as evil. Overwhelmed with guilt, I turned to Rishna, my voice heavy with frustration. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have taken you to a hospital. I would have found a way to get you treated. Why did you let this wound grow inside you like this?" Tears streamed down her face. "I knew how much you were struggling, Bahai. I knew we didn't have the money for treatment. I didn't want to burden you any further. But the pain had become unbearable." She sobbed, her voice breaking. When Salma Auntie offered to help me, I felt relieved. I thought that finally this suffering would end. But I never imagined that you would think so horribly of me. Her words cut through me like a blade. I had failed her in every way. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as tears welled in my eyes. "I'm sorry, Rishna. I'm so sorry." Despite my anger, despite my accusations, Salma Auntie and her husband were kind people. They didn't let my mistakes affect their generosity. They continued Rishna's treatment, covering all the medical expenses themselves. Within a short time, she made a full recovery. Not only that, but they also started paying for our mother's medical treatment. And, in an act of true kindness, they even enrolled Rishna in school, giving her a chance at a future she had long since given up on. Meanwhile, at the shop where I worked, I was finally promoted. My salary increased slightly, and slowly our home situation began to improve. Life, which had been at a standstill for so long, started moving forward again. But the one thing I learned from this experience was a lesson I would never forget. Never assume the worst without knowing the full truth. Never speak words that you may later regret. Even today, when I stand before Salma Auntie and her husband, I feel ashamed for the way I had treated them. I had doubted their kindness, misunderstood their intentions, and nearly destroyed the only chance my sister had at healing. Never make a decision without knowing the whole truth, because sometimes regret comes too late.